All right, hello everybody, and welcome to the show. Right off the bat, my mic seems a bit too high. Gonna adjust that a little bit. Welcome. I never know how to start off these shows. It's weird because it's just kind of like I'm sitting here just waiting for a couple viewers to come in, and just sitting around, and then hit a button, and then we go from there. So, hello to Ricky. Good start. Good start. Ricky, we met a while back. I believe we talked briefly, and I believe he's working. I think he's a Shopify developer. I could be wrong about that. A lot of people become Shopify developers these days. Like I can't keep track. But thanks, Ricky, for joining us. And anybody else who's out there, feel free to say hello on the live chat there. I messed up my settings a little bit before starting the stream, so hopefully things are still okay, and hopefully you guys are getting this feed okay. So anyways, welcome everybody to Casey Lee Live, the software edition. I do have multiple Casey Lee Live brands. One's a kind of acoustic concert, and this is the software version, so that's the software edition. If you guys are new here, very first thing I kind of ask everybody to do is to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon. One, it helps me. Helps promote the channel a little bit, helps promote what I'm doing, but also helps you in the sense that it'll notify you when I go live. We've been going live. This is the 6th or 7th time now, every Thursday at 8 p.m. So yeah, definitely subscribe. And if you want to get in touch with me, you can either message me on the chat in here at any time after the video is posted, or there's my Twitter handle right there. You can follow me on Twitter and message me there as well. Like I said, these are live every Thursday, so you can interact with me. But if you're missing it for some reason, again, the recorded version does go up on YouTube a couple minutes after. So welcome everybody. Again, got a couple of viewers live here today, so I really want to thank those people who joined us. I want to thank all the people who've been joining us regularly. It's been a lot of fun for myself, a lot of fun for me. And hopefully you guys are learning some stuff. So I really, really appreciate the support that you guys have been giving me. I really, really appreciate that. Again, if you're new to this, just a couple things. Housekeeping items. Do remember that the chat is public. So, if you have any privacy concerns or whatever, just know that your chat is going publicly out there. There is some options to redact comments, stuff like that, but your name and everything are going out there. So just heads up on that. And other than that, really, the only thing else that maybe, again, those of you who are new here, the Casey Leaf Live Software Edition is really split up into two major pieces. One is a formal lesson, so we kind of talk about some topic, and then after that, it kind of breaks down into a Q&A, and the Q&A doesn't really have to be specifically about the topic that I'm covering. It could be about anything, really. And in fact, in the last couple of weeks, the Q&A has led to topics that we talk about in future episodes. So, if you have any suggestions or anything, feel free to do that. Me and my good friend Dave are still looking for some kind of pair programming challenge. I still can't really think of what we would do, but if you guys have anything that you'd like to see me and Dave do as a pair, whether that be, again, pair programming, coding competition, whatever it may be, let me know. I'd love to hear it. But yeah, otherwise, feel free to say hello on the chat and ask questions. Even when I kind of turn away from this, as you can see, I can kind of switch between these, obviously. Even when I do that, I still have the chat window open on my other monitor, so I'll try to keep an eye on that as we're going through the formal lesson. So, okay, so we're just going to jump right into it, not waste too much time here. So I'm just going to jump to my presentation here. So welcome, everybody. Casey Lee Live Software Edition, May 7th, 2020. Today, we're talking all about setting up React. We're talking about setting up React here. And so we had some interest in people wanting to learn some front-end frameworks, whether that be something like Angular or React. There's a couple others out there like Vue. And I decided to focus on React mainly because that's what I'm used to, and that's what I know the most about. And what's interesting is the majority of my time with React, I've been kind of developing React for a couple years now, and the majority of my time of developing React has been inside the Ruby on Rails framework. And inside the Ruby on Rails framework, sometimes, especially after Rails 5.2, I think, whenever Webpacker came out, a lot of React is kind of set up for you automatically. And that's great and it's awesome. But what it does is it kind of removes a little bit of your understanding of how you can get React set up by yourself. And I obviously we haven't done a ton of Ruby on Rails in this series, so I didn't want to do a talk on React just in the context of Ruby on Rails. I kind of wanted to get React up and running for you guys in one of the simplest ways possible, while still maintaining a little bit of knowledge as to what's going on and the different components needed to get React up and running. There is a very powerful and famous getting started tool to use React called Create React App. It's basically a command line tool that you can basically fire up Create React App, and it spits out everything you need to just kind of start coding the JavaScript for React. And that's great. And I highly recommend you guys try it. And if you want to kind of just start learning React, I think that's a really great thing to do, no question. But I thought it wouldn't be worth me having a whole lecture just on Create React App, because basically it's like you install the package, you run a command, and you're good to go. Instead, what I thought I would do is kind of the next simplest version of getting a React app up and running. And that is using tools like Node, Webpack, Babel, and then ultimately React itself. So that's what I thought I would do today, is really talk about how you would set up React from kind of scratch. I don't want to say scratch, because I mean, you still have to install certain things, and you're still kind of basing some kind of level of abstraction there. But I thought kind of a little bit of understanding of some of the tools that go into getting that started. And in fact, if you learn what I talk about today, you'll have a basic understanding of how Create React App works. Create React App basically uses what I'm using today, with probably some minor tweaks and exceptions, but the general idea you'll understand. So today is not specifically about learning React. It's not about understanding how to code with React. It's just getting you to the point where you can then code in React. So by the end of this lesson, you'll be able to basically then go look up how to code React. Okay, so this is everything to get set up in React. Now, one of the benefits that I get from doing this Casey Lee live session is I actually get to learn a little bit, because, like I said, with React, I don't really concern myself with a lot of the setup, because, again, in Ruby on Rails and tools like Webpacker, I say Webpacker with that intonation because the ER is actually significant there. With Webpacker, it does everything for me. And so in order to kind of give this lesson and teach people about this, I actually had to do a little bit of learning myself. So I spent the last week learning a little bit some of these tools myself and making sure that what I was saying made some sense. Now, one thing I want to say, though, in doing that is I want to give a big thanks out to this blog post specifically. This is one of the first blog posts that comes up if you see like how to set up React with Webpack and Babel. So it's written by this guy named Valentino Gagliardi. And this is a lot of what I followed, actually. So big thanks to this blog post and to Valentino. This really, really helped me out in getting a lot of what I want to get done today. So, okay. So with that out of the way, let me say it one more time. Today is all about the tools that you need to set up React. Now, I'm not going to show you absolutely everything. I'm not going to show you absolutely all the steps to do it. But I will mention pieces that I am missing and what you would need to do to get set up. Okay. So for us to get set up set up with React, we are going to talk about four main things today. Okay. We're going to talk about Node.js. We're going to talk about Webpack. We're going to talk about Babel, and we're going to talk about React. Okay. So these four things. It's always so hard with the live stream, which direction to go. Okay. We're going to talk about these four things and give you a brief introduction to what these things are, how they work, and give a couple of little demos along the way. Okay? So once you understand these four things, and in this order, by the way, you'll understand how to get React up and running on your machine. Okay. Hello to Mark. Mark just joined us as well, so I'll give a little shout out to Mark. Mark's a regular viewer of this, so... Okay, so these four things we're going to learn about today: Node.js, Webpack, Babel, and React. Okay, so let's start with Node.js. Okay, so to understand Node.js, you guys have to understand a little bit what JavaScript is. If you're brand new to JavaScript, you don't want to confuse it with Java. even though some of their syntax is a little bit similar, Java and JavaScript are not really that related. In fact, I think I read an article or story that because Java was becoming so popular, when they developed JavaScript, they called it JavaScript because to ride the kind of success of Java. I don't know how true that is, but I think that's what I read. Okay, so to understand Node.js, you have to understand what JavaScript is. And JavaScript is basically an implementation of a spec that came out, I don't know how many years ago, like probably in the 90s, if not earlier than that, maybe 80s, I don't know. There's a spec called ECMAScript. Okay, ECMAScript is basically a specification of how you would develop a language. Okay, so ECMAScript is, I believe, was put together by a group called ECMA. And they put together the specifications for this language. They said, okay, this language would feature variables that look like this, objects that look like this, functions that do this, behave this way. They came up with all these specifications and put it into this, big document and called it ECMAScript, okay? And ECMAScript itself is not a language that you can program in. ECMAScript is just a specification, okay? So just rules and protocols and, again, specifications for if somebody were to implement a language, they would follow these rules and they would adhere to the ECMAScript specification. That's what ECMAScript is. Now, after ECMAScript was kind of not really finalized, but after it was published, then there came all these languages that implemented the ECMAScript specification. And one of those languages that came out was called JavaScript. Okay, and the first place it actually appeared was in the web browser. So I believe it was something like, I think it was like Netscape or something, one of the old browsers. They wanted to develop some extra functionality beyond HTML and CSS for the browser to understand. They wanted to give it more powerful functionality. So they wanted the browser to be able to run some more, procedural and functional code. And so the developers, I believe at Netscape, what they did is they developed something called JavaScript. And JavaScript was based on the ECMAScript specification. So they built out JavaScript, and it kind of became this really big language that existed in all browsers after that. Internet Explorer, Chrome, Safari, all these things. All these browsers were coded to understand three languages: HTML, CSS, and now JavaScript. Okay. So that is kind of the first major implementation of ECMAScript that we saw was this browser-based JavaScript. Okay, and for a long time, JavaScript was really only existent in the browser, or at least as far as I know. In popular, in kind of like popular culture, JavaScript really was only in the browser. Okay, so we used it to run things in the browser, so web apps, websites, these kind of things. Okay. Now, along comes Node.js, which was, I don't know how long ago, maybe 10 years ago now, maybe 15 years ago. And what Node.js was they said, okay, we don't want to just run JavaScript in the browser, right? We have all these languages that run on the desktop, like, Java, C++, C, Ruby, all these languages that can run on the desktop and do things like create desktop applications, server applications, do things like write to databases, write to files, access, ports and printers and monitors and all this stuff, right? All these things that these server-side languages could do. What the makers of Node.js said, well, wouldn't it be cool if we could do that, but using the JavaScript syntax? Okay. So no longer just doing web application stuff, but actually doing server-side stuff. But in order to do that, we would need something that could interpret JavaScript on a computer, on a outside the browser, basically. Okay, so anything outside the browser, we would need some kind of engine or some kind of runtime that would understand JavaScript. And that's exactly what Node.js is. So Node.js is a JavaScript runtime that allows you to run JavaScript on your machine. Okay, so that means code that we used to only write for browsers, we can now write that for the desktop. Okay, and we could execute it on our desktop. Okay, so this is really interesting, actually. This is the first time we could run JavaScript on the server side. Okay, and what's interesting about that is it wouldn't look exactly the same as the JavaScript we'd run in the browser, because the browser, you'd be doing things like manipulating the DOM. Okay, you would be manipulating elements in the HTML document. Well, not all server-side JavaScript programs had a DOM or even had an HTML document, right? So you would be doing things. Think about all the other desktop applications that you might program using things like Java, C#, C++, those kind of things. All those kind of things, like pop up a window, create a button, these kind of things, right? You could do now using the JavaScript syntax, okay? And what made that all possible was with Node.js. Now, I want to go one step further than this. So when they created Node.js, they definitely did all the things that you could do, or most of the things that you could do with JavaScript in the browser. But then it went even further than that. They started implementing some really fancy features, and features that came from ideas completely original to them, but also incorporating ideas from newer ECMAScript specifications. So sometimes you guys will hear ES 2015 or ES7, these kind of things. ES stands for ECMAScript, and they're newer versions of the specification. And Node.js started implementing these a lot faster than the browser, actually. A lot of browsers today do not understand a lot of the newer ECMAScript stuff. But Node.js does. Node.js made a very powerful JavaScript engine beyond what you could do on the browser, and it would do a lot of really cool things. Okay. So let me give you a really brief demo of Node.js. I'll be honest, I don't really know Node.js. I've never really dealt with it ever, besides kind of these kind of tutorials. But what's nice is I know JavaScript from doing my web development. So it's the same language. So I should be able to just execute relatively the same kind of stuff, right? All right, so let me give you a quick demo here. So what I have here is I have this folder here called Node Demo, and it's empty right now. Okay, so there's nothing in there. And so to get Node running, it's a runtime, you have to install it on your machine. So whether Mac or PC, you have to install it on your machine. Just like if you're coding in Java, you need to install a Java virtual machine. Python, you need to install Python itself. Same thing with Node. Node, you need to install the Node runtime in order to run Node applications. So if you install Node into your machine in your terminal or command line, okay, whether this be command prompt or bash or whatever, you should be able to type node-v, which will give you the version of Node that's installed. Okay, so I have a version of Node installed there, and you'll notice that's very similar to Java and Ruby, these kind of things, these runtimes, right? And so I can start writing a JavaScript program. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just create a new file, and I'm going to save it as just like index.js. Whoops, wrong window. Okay, so I have a file in here, and now I should be able to just write regular JavaScript like I'm used to in the browser. Okay, so I could create a variable, say name. I create a variable, let's say first name, and a variable called last name, and I can output that to the console. Okay. So this is exactly the same syntax as I would use in the browser, right? Now here's already you can see some of the differences between the browser versus the desktop version of JavaScript, right? Console.log in the browser, for those who know, would execute. You'd see that in the console tab in developer tools. Here it just outputs it to the command line. Okay, so let's see if I can run this. So if I run node and then just the file. And there you go. It outputs hello, Casey Lee. Okay. So there we go. We can run JavaScript in there. Okay. Now, again, what I told you is that Node is a lot quicker to get to some of the newer specifications, like ES 2015 specifications. So in ES 2015, they introduced the idea of const and let. Okay. So variables that were no longer just var. You could actually declare them as non-changing variables like constants or you could use let, okay? So I can actually use that syntax here, and Node will understand it just fine. So if I run that again, there we go, no problem. Okay? So that's Node. That's Node in a nutshell, okay? Like you can run JavaScript on your desktop, and obviously you can create very rich, crazy, big, huge applications, okay, with Node, okay? Just as a side note, this is what's really interesting about Node.js combined with a framework like Express. You can do a web application where your server-side language and your client-side language is the exact same language. That's kind of interesting for the web developers out there. Okay, so that's Node in a nutshell. All right, so let's go to the next thing. So I want to talk about NPM and Yarn when we talk about Node. So Node ships with a package manager called NPM, okay? And what a package manager is again, I know there's one for Python. I can't remember what it's called. Java's getting better at this, but if you guys are Java developers out there, you'll know that you can download jar files, and use methods and classes from those files. Well, NPM is basically called the Node Package Manager. And what it allows you to do is download third-party libraries. Just like Python libraries, just like Java libraries, you can download JavaScript libraries from the internet, okay? It's all hosted on a website called NPM. It's kind of confusing. NPM is a tool that you use to download packages from the NPM repository that's out there in the public, okay? And so this is a way that you can very easily download and manage third-party libraries that you want to use, okay? If you guys are familiar with Ruby, there's a equivalent of this called Bundler. Bundler is very similar to this, okay? And so NPM allows you to do this. Now, NPM for a while was not the most robust package manager. One of the things it lacked was this thing we call a lock file. Okay, so usually when you deal with package managers, you say, download version 3 of this library that I want to use, or download the latest version of this library that I want to use. And when you would download them, depending what time you downloaded them, it might be a different package, right? So if you say download the latest version of this, it may be version 3 today, but if you download it a week from now, it may be version 3.1. And so usually when you talk about package managers, there's this idea of what's the exact version you downloaded, and that's what lock files do, okay? So sometime around then, developers, I believe at Facebook, I could be wrong about that. I can't remember who came up with it, but there's these group of developers who came up with an alternative to NPM called Yarn, okay? So Yarn came out and added some extra features to NPM, okay? Now, what's cool about Yarn is that Yarn uses the same public repository to download its packages. So NPM and Yarn both pull from the same place, but they do it in different ways. And Yarn introduced this thing called the lock file, which helped a lot with package management. Now, what's interesting is more recently, NPM came out with version 5, I believe. I can't remember if it was 4 or 5. And NPM introduced their own version of a lock file. So at this point, apparently, NPM and Yarn are kind of neck and neck in terms of features and functionality. Some people prefer Yarn, some people prefer NPM. I've been using Yarn for the last little while, so I'm going to stick with Yarn. But so the only extra thing you need to know about Yarn is that you kind of have to install it separately, whereas NPM ships automatically with Node. Okay, so Yarn is a basic way to download and install and use JavaScript packages. Long story short, okay? NPM and Yarn. All right, so let's see this in action. Actually, let me mention this. Okay, so the first is the package.json. So the package.json is a listing of all the libraries that you want and the versions that you want of those, okay? So let's say I want to use jQuery and Lodash and Axios or whatever. Like you want to use these libraries, okay? This is where you list them, is in package.json. And in fact, both NPM and Yarn have tools that you don't have to manually list them in there. They have commands that you can add them in intelligently, okay? Like I said, they also have a second feature called a lock file, which records the exact version you downloaded when you decided to install these packages. And then the third thing you need to understand is this Node modules folder. So when you download packages to actually use them, they get downloaded into a Node modules folder, okay? So anytime you use NPM or Yarn, okay, you're going to download these JavaScript packages and put them into the Node modules folder. Okay. All right. So let's see this in action. Okay. So I have this program here, and it's just this index.js file. Okay. Pretty simple. I'm just going to shorten it so we can see it all on one screen here. Okay. Let's make sure that runs. Okay. Perfect. It runs. Okay. So now I want to use a third-party library, okay? And the third-party library that everybody always seems to use as a sample is Lodash, okay? So Lodash is this JavaScript library that comes with all these nice utilities. Like, for example, you can concatenate two arrays. You can concatenate a value to an array. You can get the difference. You can flatten an array. There's a lot of things you can do. That's just an array. You can do things with collections and dates and functions. All this fancy stuff you can do with Lodash, okay? So let's say I want to use this. So one thing I could do is copy all the Lodash code into my code, but then what if they update theirs and all this stuff? It's really hard to do it manually. So we're going to use a package manager, namely Yarn, okay? You could use Yarn or NPM. Okay, to start using Yarn, you need a package.json file. Okay, so to do that, I'm going to type in yarn init, which is going to initialize this package.json file. Now, what's kind of nice is it walks you through this interactive set of questions so that you can put in exactly what you want to configure it. But after I'm done that, you'll see it creates this package.json file for me. Okay, we're not going to worry about everything else in here. What we're going to do is we're going to start adding libraries that we want to use in this. Okay, so what I'm going to do is to add a library that I want to use, all I have to do is type in yarn add and then the name of that library. So in this case, it's Lodash. Okay. Now, again, what this is going to do is Yarn is going to add it to this package.json file just so we have a record that we want to use this. Then Yarn is going to say, okay, now look in the package.json for all the packages that I do not have downloaded yet. Okay. In this case, there are no packages downloaded. Okay, so it's going to do those two steps. It's going to add it to the file, and then it's going to check that file for all the packages that haven't been downloaded yet. Okay, and when it does that, it's going to come across Lodash because it's been added to the file. And then it's going to go out to the internet, out to the public NPM repository, and download Lodash and put it into a new folder called Node Modules. Okay, so watch. Yarn add Lodash, I hit enter. Okay. So what it's going to do, all right, so there you go. So it added it to the package.json, and it says, okay, my project depends on Lodash and a version of around 4.17.15, okay? Then it went out to the internet and grabbed that folder and that package, and by the way, any libraries that it depends on, and stuffs them all into Node modules. Okay, so there you go. There's all the source code for Lodash. Okay, it got put all into this Node modules folder. Okay. By the way, if you're doing source control, you shouldn't need to check in the Node modules folder because anybody who gets this code will have the package.json and the yarn.lock. The lock file is very important, and they can just run yarn to download all those files. Okay. All right. So the package has now been installed. Okay. Into Node modules. And now I can use it. Okay. Because it's in Node modules, I can now reference it. So in JavaScript, to import packages, we can do something like this. So we're going to call it whatever we want. I'm going to call it underscore because that's the convention, but I could call it Lodash. I could call it, Lodash library. I could call it whatever I want, but I'm going to call it underscore. And then that's going to come from Lodash. Now, Node.js is automatically going to look for this library in Node modules. Okay, so that's how that works. Okay, now once I do that, I can actually start using it. Okay, so let's create an array and test this out. Let's create a second array. And let's see if we can actually concatenate the two using Lodash. Okay, we'll concatenate the two, and we'll just output that to the screen. Okay. So we'll run that. And there we go. There's a concatenated array. Okay. So NPM and Yarn allow you to easily download packages. And once you download them, you can instantly use them in your code. Okay. So that's what NPM and Yarn are all about. Okay. So just a recap. Node is a JavaScript runtime that allows you to run JavaScript on your machine. Packaged in with Node is NPM. Alternatively, you can download a program called Yarn and use either of these to manage your third-party libraries that you want to download into your project. Okay. What I really like about NPM and Yarn versus some other package managers is that they actually download those packages directly into your project. So you don't have to worry about conflicting versions and all this stuff like that. It's all directly in your project. So, okay. So that's Node.js, and hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so let's talk about Webpack. Okay, so you know what Node is. You know what NPM and Yarn is. Okay, Webpack. Okay, so like I said, Node actually started to advance a lot faster than browsers did. Okay, when it came to JavaScript and the features that JavaScript offered. Okay, so one of the key things that Node offered was that fact that we could even import or require Lodash. Okay, the fact that we could just grab it and put it into our code and then use it in our code. Okay, in the browser doesn't have a super intelligent way to manage this. Okay, we call this kind of module management. Okay, JavaScript packages we typically call modules, and to manage these modules and only use them in the files that we need them, and not just have them globally declared so that everybody can use them. Okay, browsers didn't have an intelligent way to do this. The best that browsers could do is say, okay, if you want to use Lodash or jQuery, just include it in your HTML file at the top, and then you can use it everywhere. Okay, but that's not really intelligent because then it's just global and everybody can use it, and we don't have this idea of scoping to specific modules and all this stuff. So we don't have this idea of module management when it comes to browser-based JavaScript. Node has it, but browsers don't have it. And the other thing that browsers don't have, which I talked about already, is all the kind of modern ECMAScript stuff. Okay, so things like const and let keywords, keywords like class, the idea of string interpolation. Okay, like you couldn't even do concatenate a string without doing pluses in between, things like that. There's all this fancy stuff that was introduced in later versions of ECMAScript that the browser and a lot of browsers just don't understand. And some browsers are better than others. Don't get me wrong. Some browsers are starting to support some of these features, but not all of them are. And in fact, most of them still don't really support the majority of features that JavaScript programmers like, especially ones who come from the Node background. Okay, and the more you start to code in this fashion with these kind of more modern JavaScript features, the more you like it, and you can scope things, and it creates better software. And browsers just didn't have that. Okay, browsers just don't have that ability. Okay, because they haven't caught up yet. Okay, browsers are still very basic JavaScript. Okay, so this is where Webpack comes in. Okay, what Webpack is a JavaScript module bundler. Okay, so that's feature number one. Webpack allows you to do things like requiring JavaScript modules inside other modules. Okay, it's a JavaScript module bundler. It allows you to mix and match your code and reuse your code in a lot more structured way and scoped way and much more intelligent way. Okay, so Webpack is a JavaScript module bundler. Okay, so you can do things like require or import. Okay, that also has a lot of extensibility to compile modern JavaScript into something that most browsers understand. Okay, so this is the interesting thing about Webpack. What Webpack basically allows you to do is code an application completely in modern JavaScript and using module management. Okay, and what Webpack will do is bundle that all in and compile it and translate it and spit out JavaScript that most browsers will understand and keep the functionality that you coded. Okay? So this is an amazing thing for web developers, okay? Because browsers are so far behind. So if we want to code all the crazy functionality that we want, we'd have to code in kind of old school JavaScript, okay? What Webpack allows us to do is just code in modern day JavaScript, okay? Modern JavaScript, and Webpack will handle translating it and massaging it and compiling it and transpiling it into an output that that modern browsers will understand. Okay? So, what that means, actually, we'll get into that in a second, but that's what Webpack is, okay? Allows you to write modern JavaScript, and then it spits out JavaScript that a browser would understand, okay? So, like I said, there's two main features of this. One, the fact that it's a module bundler, okay? So you can import or require different JavaScript modules, and you can create your own JavaScript modules and import those and stuff like that, okay? And it actually does this in a really intelligent way. It actually creates what's called a dependency graph. So it'll say, okay, what's your starting JavaScript file? It'll look at that and says, okay, well, what file does this depend on? Oh, it depends on these three libraries. Oh, and these three libraries depend on these libraries. Okay, and these libraries depend on these libraries. And it creates this dependency graph and imports everything in an ordered way and doesn't repeat imports unless it needs to, and generates everything that it needs to compile it all into one gigantic JavaScript file. So that's the first thing. The second thing, which is actually probably even more powerful, is that Webpack allows you to use what are called loaders and plugins to give you a lot more extensibility, okay? So what it allows you to do is do things like use modern JavaScript, like ES 2015. What's really crazy is it can even translate non-JavaScript stuff into JavaScript. It can translate CSS into a form that JavaScript would understand. Okay, so it can do that, which is really crazy. It can even translate images. Okay, you can have an image that Webpack will translate into JavaScript. And this is the really crazy thing about Webpack. Webpack, ultimately, when it boils down to it, is just JavaScript. It only understands JavaScript. And its output is only JavaScript. Remember, it's outputting JavaScript that browsers understand. But using its intelligence and its loaders and its plugins and all this stuff like that, it can also translate a bunch of other things into a form that JavaScript will understand. Now, what's interesting is you don't have to worry about this translation because Webpack is doing this all for you. Okay? The best way I feel you should look at Webpack, because I myself got a little bit confused about this. Webpack is a tool that you use to write web application code, okay? Code that's going to be deployed to the browser, okay? But Webpack itself doesn't live on the browser, and Webpack isn't shipped with the browser in any way like that, okay? Webpack is a tool that actually sits on your own machine, the development machine, okay? Or whatever server machine, okay? And Webpack will, again, compile and translate and transpile your code into output files, and those output files are what gets sent to the browser and can be viewed in the browser, okay? So Webpack is a tool that sits on the server or on your machine and spits out this compiled code, and that's what you get sent to the browser, okay? So this is why I say it can kind of be viewed as a compiler, right? Because think about like all the analogies. Okay, look at C code. Okay, when we write C code, okay, the code itself can't run on a machine. So you use a compiler, and that spits out, I believe, bytecode that an operating system can understand. Okay, Java, you write, again, this fancy code that's easy for developers to use, and then you run it through a compiler, and that spits out compiled Java code that a Java virtual machine understands. Okay. Webpack, you write modern JavaScript, and then Webpack takes that and spits out JavaScript that most browsers will understand. Okay. So it's a tool that you install on your machine, and you write your code, and then you compile it, and then the output of it, that's what you put on your web server. That's what you send to your users. Okay? That's what Webpack is. Okay, I talked about this already. This is why we use Webpack, because we want to use all the features of modern day JavaScript as web developers. Okay, but we can't do that out of the box because browsers don't understand them. So we code and we let Webpack translate it for us and spit out vanilla JavaScript, ES5 JavaScript that browsers will understand. Okay. Now, when I talk about modern JavaScript, I talked about this already. You have things like module management, you have const and let, you have class syntax, string interpolation, destructuring. You have all these fancy tools at your disposal, and that's why we like to use it. Okay. Like I said, Webpack allows us to code in modern JavaScript and then compile it out to JavaScript that most browsers understand. Okay. So that's what Webpack is. Well, how do you use it? Like, how do you install it? Well, it turns out Webpack ships as an NPM module. So now you know why we did an introduction to Node, and now you know why we did an introduction to NPM and Yarn. Okay. So we introduced those because you need those to then install Webpack and all of its tools and then use it. Okay. All right. So let's do a quick demo here. And I might need to reference my code here. All right. So I have this other folder called React Setup. Okay. And I'm just going to delete that. Start from scratch. Okay, so I just have an empty folder here called React Setup. And I want to install Webpack on this. Okay, so I can use Webpack and use it to do its like thing where it compiles my JavaScript code. Okay, so what I can do is I'm going to use Yarn. All right, so let's just start a new tab here. Okay, so it's just a new command line session here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to initialize a package.json, just like before. One thing I am going to change here, though, is when it says private, I'm going to say true. If you're curious about that, what's interesting is when you create a package.json, there's the potential that you may want to release what you're coding itself as a package, right? So, I mean, you're going to use this to import other packages, but you might be coding a package yourself. What private true means is you're never going to publish this. So just set that up. Okay. And now the package.json, and now I can add the node modules that I want to install. Okay. So I'm going to add two node modules, one called Webpack and one called the Webpack command line interface. I believe it's those two things that we need. Yep. Oh, I need to put add. Okay. And we only need these during development. So we're just going to tack on the dev there. And what this is going to do is just like when we did yarn add Lodash. It's going to go out to, it's going to first add these things to the package.json. Then it's going to go out to the internet and find those packages and install them into the node modules folder. Okay. And once it installs them in there, it actually is going to actually record what versions we happen to specifically grab in the lock file. Okay, while this is doing this, let me know if you guys have any questions so far about Node and Webpack. Also note that if you guys ever want to start a live stream, you might want to get a beefier computer than 2015 MacBook Pro. Definitely everything really slows down when you start to live stream. So okay, well, while this is going, I'm kind of going to explain the next bit here. So I told you guys that Webpack takes in modern day JavaScript and outputs JavaScript that most browsers will understand. Okay. And it's interesting to look at the JavaScript that it outputs because it's really crazy. It gets really big and long, and There's a lot of setup that it has to do to make it work. Now, to do that, though, you have two options with Webpack, specifically Webpack 4 and above. So Webpack 4 and above tells you that you can either use Webpack with zero configuration whatsoever, or you can actually specify a configuration file. And one of the main things that that configuration file tells us is, okay, where am I reading the files that I'm going to compile, and where do I output their compiled result? Okay. So in other words, where are the files that you actually compile? Okay. What are the ones that you're coding the modern JavaScript? And when I'm done compiling it, where do you want to put the output to? Okay. So if you don't specify any configuration whatsoever, like if we start right now and we don't specify any configuration, there's two default places that there's two default folders that it uses. Okay. One is called source and one is called dist. Source is where it's going to default look for a file called index.js, and that's what it's going to use as its default entry point. Okay. In other words, that is the file that it's going to start to build its dependency graph, and it's going to compile all that quote code, and then it's going to spit out that ES5 vanilla JavaScript. Okay. Where it outputs it to is the dist folder to a file called main.js. Okay. So let's do that first version where we don't have any configuration set up. Okay. So all I have to do is make two directories. Okay. So one called source and one called dist. Okay. I think of distribution. Okay. So we have source and distribution. And under source, it's looking for a file called index.js. Okay. So I'm going to create a file called index.js. And when we compile this, it's going to spit out what it's compiled into the dist folder. Okay. So let's try this out. Okay. Let's do something really simple here. Okay. Really, really basic. Okay. So we're going to declare a variable. Okay. Called A. And then we are going to output that variable to the console. That's all we're going to do. Okay. Very simple. Okay. So what we're going to do is to build this, okay? Remember, Webpack already knows where the file is because we followed their convention of source index.js. So all we have to do is run yarn webpack. Okay? So if I do that, it's going to look for index.js. It's going to run it through its compiler, okay? And then spit out a file called main.js into the dist folder. Okay, there we go. So it finished. Took about 3 seconds. And it spit out main.js. Okay, and that came from source index.js. Okay. So if I look at that file now, you'll see it's this minified JavaScript. Okay. And there's a lot going on in here. Okay. Because it has to kind of set up everything that it needs to set up to run, anything that you might throw at it. So there's all this extra stuff that's happening here. Minifies it all to one line. So it's nice and easy for the browser. And it even does some optimization. You see here, look at the very end where we finally find our console.log. It actually did console.log and just set it to 3. It actually didn't set a variable because when it compiled this, it knew that the value is not changing. I'm just going to put 3 in there and optimize it. Okay. But this is what it spit out. Okay. Now, again, you don't normally need to look at this, but this a regular browser will understand. Now, mind you, this a regular browser would understand because we haven't used anything fancy, but I want to start simple. Okay. So now we have a main.js. So this now is a piece of JavaScript that can run in the browser. Okay, so why don't we try running it in the browser? So let's create a web page to actually use it. Okay, so in the dist, I'm just going to create another file here called index.html. So we're just going to write a regular web page here. All right, so we'll just write some HTML here. Okay, so in the head, I am going to now import that JavaScript. Okay, so we'll do a style sheet. Or not style sheet, what am I talking about? Script tag. Okay, JavaScript, and the source is coming from main.js. Now, because this file is in the same folder as this, I don't have to reference any path or anything like that. Okay, main.js. And that should execute this code, right? Because this is what, sorry, it shouldn't execute this code directly. This is the functionality that I wanted it to do. So console.log the variable a, which is 3. So I should see a 3 in the console. That got compiled to this, and this is what's actually being run if I were to open this page. Okay, so let's try that out. Okay, so let's go to our browser, and let's open that file. Okay, so workshops, React setup, distribution, index. So I'll open that up. Okay, nothing on screen because that's not what I did. I actually put it to the console. So let's take a look at the console. Okay, and there we go. The number 3 got output there. Okay, so that's how Webpack works. You code something in one file, run it through Webpack, Webpack outputs it, and then you're good to go. Okay, so let's try something that a browser would not understand. Browsers do not understand the word const. So let's try that out. Okay, so I've done that. Let's rebuild it. Takes a second to rebuild. While it's rebuilding, by the way, if you guys get really interested in Webpack, and you should really research some of the other things. I'm kind of doing this as an introductory lesson, but there are some tools that you don't have to rebuild it manually every time yourself. So, okay, so it output main.js. Let's take a look at main.js. Okay, it looks all good. All right. And if I look for const doesn't exist anywhere here. So it got transpiled. Now, in this case, it got transpiled to just putting the 3 directly in there just like before, but still. Okay, and now I can run this again. I don't have to change this because it's the same file name. So let's reload that, and the number 3 is there. Okay, now let's just make sure we're not getting a false positive here, like something went wrong with the compile or something like that. So let's actually change this to const. Let's do it to const there, and let's do a string interpolation. So do backticks, do first number A, second number B. Okay, let's see if that works. This is all fancy ES 2015 syntax. Okay, so let's build that. Okay, it's built. So now if we refresh this page, there you go. First number 3, second number 4. Okay. So there you go. There's Webpack in action. All right. You code modern JavaScript, it spits out regular JavaScript. You actually use the regular JavaScript in your web pages. Okay. All right. So that's the default configuration. Now I want to talk a little bit about creating your own configuration, because what might be handy is for every HTML page, you have a specific JavaScript file. Okay. So you might have an about page, an index page, a home page, right? So let's do that. Okay. So let's say we have, let's say we have a home page. All right. And let's say we have an about page. And let's say we have a contact page. Okay. And all those pages, okay, will have, when we're finished with all this, they'll have their own JavaScript file. Okay. So we'll have a contact.js. The about will have an about.js. About.js. About contact and home. Excuse me. What are we doing here? Script. Okay. Source equals home.js. Okay. So we'll have three files: home.js, about.js, and contact.js, which haven't been generated by Webpack yet, but they will be. And we've included them in all our HTML pages here. Okay, so let's do this. Okay, so let's create let's create this here. So we have home.js. We'll get rid of this index. Don't need that anymore. Okay, and don't get rid of the main as well. Okay, so we have home.js, and we'll have a contact.js, and we'll have an about.js. Okay, there we go. About, contact, and home. All right, and let's just make this really simple for all of them right now. We'll do a console.log home contact.js. Whoops. And about.js. All right, so we got those three. And okay, so now we're going to introduce configuration to say, okay, well, I want to use these three files, not just the default file, and output those, and also output those with corresponding names. Okay, so I do have to reference this one because again, I don't typically do a lot of this stuff. So let's start with it. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to add a configuration file. Okay, and the default place that Webpack looks for is webpack.config.js. Okay, that's the default place it looks for. Okay, and I do have to look at my notes for this one, but this is basically what we want. Okay, so you're going to use the path library, and you're going to specify a JSON object with key value pairs here. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to specify what our entry points are. Okay, the entry points are basically what are the files that you want Webpack to compile. Okay, and what are the files you want to start at to look at all the dependencies and everything like that. Okay, so we're going to give each one of these a name. Okay, so about, and that is in about.js. Okay, contact is in the contact.js, and home is in the home.js. Okay, now again, this may seem really tedious going forward. Like, well, what if I have 50 JavaScript files? I have to create a name for each one of them. As you go forward, there are way more intelligent ways to do this. So since this is just introductory, I just want to kind of show you an easy way like this to understand. But there are way more advanced ways to do this. Ways that I don't even understand because, again, I don't really get into this that often. But there are more advanced ways to do this. Okay, so I have a entry point called about, and its sources from here, contact and home. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, once you've compiled the about, okay, output it to the dist file, okay, and name it whatever name that we specified here, okay? And so this square bracket name will take the name that's here, okay? So it's going to go through each one of these files, run it through the Webpack transpiler, and then what it's going to do is it's going to output the name.js into the dist folder. Okay, so let's take a look at that. So let's run that. Okay, so you see this time we actually have three things output now. So we have three JavaScript files. That's because we had three entry points. Okay, and it named them about.js, contact.js, and home.js. Okay, so if you look at the dist folder, now you'll see all those JS files are there. Okay, now we've already imported them. Okay, so I'm just going to create some links here to make this easy on us. So in the body, I'm just going to create a couple links here. So we're going to do home.html, about, contact, okay. I'm just going to grab those links and put them into all our bodies here. Contact, home, and about. All right, so those about.js's were all output, and now I'm using them in all of these. So let's see how this might work. So I'll go to home, and you'll see it output home in the console. If I go to about gets output to the console. If I go to contact gets output to the console. Okay. Okay, so that's it for Webpack. Okay, so Webpack, again, one last time, takes modern JavaScript and outputs it to JavaScript files that you can then send over to the browser. Okay. Babel. Okay, like I said, Webpack allows you to write modern JavaScript. Well, to be honest, out of the box, Webpack doesn't do that. Out of the box, Webpack does one main thing, which is module bundling of JavaScript modules. Allows you to require modules, creates a dependency graph, creates one big JavaScript file, output it. That's what it does out of the box. But Webpack has these things called loaders and plugins that allow you to do a lot more. And loaders specifically allow you to transpile or translate non-regular JavaScript, okay, non-regular browser JavaScript. It can translate things like CSS, it can translate things like images, it can translate things like modern JavaScript, okay? So what loader can we use to translate modern JavaScript into browser regular JavaScript? The loader we're going to use is called Babel, okay? So Babel itself is a library. It's a JavaScript library that allows you to take modern JavaScript and translate it into regular JavaScript. Okay, but Babel has a Webpack loader. So we can use the Webpack Babel loader to translate modern JavaScript into regular JavaScript. Okay. So like I said, Webpack by itself just mainly does module management, but it's the loaders that allow us to translate from ES 2015, translate any modern JavaScript basically into anything else, okay? And the loader that we're going to use is called Babel. Okay. So how do we install Babel? Well, we're going to do that using Webpack, okay? So Webpack has this framework to install loaders. And when you install the loader, it says, okay, how do you want to use this, okay? Like what files do you want to run through this loader so that the loader can translate into regular JavaScript? Okay. So first of all, we are going to add the Babel libraries, okay? And we're going to do that using Yarn again because they ship as node modules, okay? So there's a couple of them. There's Babel core. And in case you're wondering what these @ signs or stuff like that, not modern, but nowadays when you deal with NPM, a lot of the times, the way they're shipping them now is they're specifying the author first / the name of the library. Okay, so Babel core, we're going to install the loader itself. Okay. And then these preset environment. Okay. And also we're going to also install a version of Babel that's set up specifically for React. Okay. And these are all developer dependencies. Okay, so what we're doing now is we're installing all of the libraries that we need to use Babel as a loader in Webpack. Okay, so what that means is once we've installed all these libraries, we'll then basically say, hey, Webpack, on top of all the module bundling you're doing, can you also translate some of these files for me using Babel? Okay, and Babel itself dictates the rules on how to do the translation. Webpack just executes it, okay? And then outputs the final output. Hopefully that makes sense. There's definitely a lot to swallow today. Now, again, Babel does come with some options and ways to set it up. And Babel does have configurations that for like, well, what features do you want to enable? What features don't you want to enable? Are there things that you'd like added extra? For example, when we get into React uses something called JSX, which is not regular JavaScript. And Babel can translate JSX as well. So you can install Babel and say, I want to enable these things. And that's part of these environments that we're installing as well. Okay. So we've just installed Babel. Okay, and all the Babel loader. Okay, so if you look at the package.json, we've listed those Babel loaders here, okay, and the Babel libraries. And if you actually look at your node modules, they're all in there as well. Okay, at Babel, it's all there. So it's all ready for us to use. Okay, so Webpacker can now use this. Okay, and the way we tell Webpack to use this is we have to use our custom configuration. Okay. Sorry, before we do that, we've installed Babel, but like I said, Babel has certain features that you can turn on and off, right? So how do you tell Babel what to turn on, what to turn off? Well, one way you can do that is with a file called babel.rc. Okay, so we're gonna create a file called babel.rc. Okay, .babel.rc. And when Babel is used, Babel is going to look for this file to say, okay, well, what features do you want to translate and not? Like, what features do you want on and off, right? Like, what modern features do you want to use? Do you want to use React's JSX syntax? Do you want to use any of that stuff, okay? And what we need to put in there are the presets that we're going to use. Okay, so these presets are basically a collection of features that we want enabled for Babel. Okay, so there's a lot to go through here. So Webpack is going to bundle our code into output files. Before it bundles it, it can also translate or transpile our code. The way it's going to transpile that code is using something called Babel. And Babel is going to be configured with certain features enabled and disabled using this Babel.rc file. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense. Okay. Now that Babel is configured and ready to use, let's actually use it. Okay? So we come into our Webpack config file. And so we know the entry points and we know the output. Now we want to tell Webpack how to process our files. And to process our files, you specify the module key and you specify a set of rules. Okay. Sorry, this is an array of rules. So basically what you're telling Webpack is you're saying, okay, when you compile my code, I want you to take certain files and run them through certain transpilers. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to specify a test. Okay? And the test is basically a test to see which files we actually want to run through this rule. Okay? So this is a regular expression. And it basically says, grab any file that ends in JS or JSX. If those files match this rule, if those files match, then run it through this rule. Okay. So what's the rule that we're going to use? Okay. We're going to exclude anything that's in the node modules folder. Okay. And the rule we're going to use is the loader. Okay. And the loader we're going to use is called Babel loader. Okay. So we still have the same entry points and output points. But what we say is, okay, if any of the entry points has a JS at the end of it, which all three of these do, then run, and as long as those files are not in the node modules folder, run it through the Babel loader. And what the Babel loader is going to do is it's going to say, okay, well, what features do you have enabled through Babel.rc? Okay, I have all these features enabled. So things like const, let, destructuring, JSX, all these things. And I'm going to translate that into regular vanilla JavaScript that browsers understand. Okay. So that is how we use Babel. All right. So Babel is set up. And Babel is set up now for us to use modern JavaScript and even some extra features like React JSX. Okay. So with that in place, okay, we can now use React. Okay, so we've set up Node, we've installed Webpack using Yarn. We've set up the Babel loader. Okay, and now we can finally use React. Okay, so React is a JavaScript library, just like any of the other libraries we've been importing, like Webpack, Babel, Lodash, all libraries. React is a JavaScript library written by Facebook developers, and it's used to create really rich user interfaces. Okay. To use the React library, we use modern JavaScript to write it, and we even use some features that React itself introduced. The main one being JSX. Okay, so we'll talk about JSX in a second. But we're not going to do a deep dive in React today. We're just going to get it up and running. Okay, so now that Node is set up with Webpack and Babel's all ready to go, we can now simply import the React library and just start using it. Okay, because any code that we write using React, Webpack will know how to transpile it and manage it with its own module management combined with the Babel loader. It will know how to translate that into regular JavaScript. Okay. It's a bunch of JavaScript modules that can be imported, and then once you've imported it, you can use it. Okay, so there's two libraries that we use in React. One is called React itself, and then one is called React DOM. React DOM is just this one special library that you use to incorporate React code into the DOM. Okay, so we're going to import those. And while it does its thing, oh, it's almost done actually. Okay, so it's done there. Okay, so now the React library module is ready for us to use. Okay, and when we use it in our code, in our modern JavaScript, okay, when we run it through Webpack, Webpack has everything it needs to compile and use that and output that code to the dist folder. Okay, so let's do a really simple example here. We're going to write some React code today. Okay, so I'm actually going to do this on the home page. Okay, so I'm going to bring up the home.js, not the output, but the source. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to write some React code. Okay, so to write some React code, I first have to import the React library. Okay, so I'm going to import the React library, and I'm going to call it React. Okay, again, you can call it whatever you want. By the way, this is very similar to doing this. Okay, these are two different styles of module management. Okay, one's called CommonJS, and I can't remember what the other one's called. These are two very similar ways to basically include extra JavaScript in yours and export your JavaScript to somewhere else, by the way. Okay, so we're going to import the React, and then we also have the other library, React DOM. I'm going to call it React DOM from React DOM. Okay, so this is where you're getting it from. Okay, so if you look at the node modules, there is a folder called React. There it is. And then there's a folder called React DOM. So this is where they're getting it from. And then once I include it in my file, I'm going to call it React and React DOM. Again, you could call these whatever you wanted. Okay. All right. Now we're going to do some fancy syntax that doesn't usually exist in regular JavaScript. So we're going to say class. Okay. JavaScript inherently doesn't have classes. It uses what's called prototypes. But there is some ES 2015 class syntax that kind of makes it behave like a class. Okay. But again, because we have Babel, Babel's going to know what to do with this and transpile it. Okay, so what I can do is create a React component. Okay, so I'm going to say my first component. And it extends the React components. Okay, now this piece here, I don't expect you guys to know. This is when we actually dive directly into React. Okay, but I'm going to create some React code here. Very first thing about React is it has a render method. And what the render method does is basically say, okay, wherever you're going to put this component, this is what you're going to output. Okay, so I could do something like this. I could say return hello. Okay, and then it would output hello to that. Okay, so let's just start with that. Okay, and then what I want to do with this is wherever this code is run, I want to actually mount this component to some div or span or whatever on my HTML. Okay, again, this is all React concepts. Don't get too caught up in that right now. Okay, so I'm going to create a mount point here. So I'm going to say mount point. So this is where it's going to insert my React code, or the output of my React code. Okay, so the output of my React code is hello. Okay, and hello is going to be inserted in here. Okay, now to do that, to mount it to that, what I have to do is I have to find that element first. So I can say get element by ID. And once I have that, I can call React DOM.render. And I specify my component to render. And I render it to the element. Okay. Again, all very fancy JavaScript. But again, our Webpacker should know our Webpack should know what to do with this. Okay, so if I run Webpack again. Oh, we have an issue here. Right, my configuration's off. What's wrong with my configuration? So module rules. Oh, this should be an object itself. There. So you can have a bunch of rules, but each rule is an object itself. Okay. All right, let's see what it does. Might have to get a second computer, one to stream and one to do the coding on. It's taking a little while. Please let me know if you have any questions, guys. If as this is running. Oh, there we go. Just spoke too soon. Okay, so there it output home.js, and if we go look at home.js, again, it's probably a lot of stuff that's really hard to understand. It's taking a while to load here. Okay, lots of stuff going on here. Quite a bit of JavaScript that it had to translate that into. Okay, definitely lots of stuff going on there. Okay. But now if that worked, I should be able to import that here. Now, one lazy thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to import this JavaScript after this mount point is put in. Normally what you would do is you would say, okay, after the document is loaded, then run this script. But I'm just lazy, so I'm just going to put it after this to make sure that the mount point actually exists before we run that part. And then so if we run this now, we go back home, you'll see hello is right there. Okay. So React code, whatever you return in your render statement gets output into that mount point. And then our React code's running. Okay. So there you go. Now we're all set up for React. Okay. So we can do a lot of fancy React stuff. So again, now that we have Babel and the React Babel preset, that understands a lot of fancy things. We can do a lot of crazy modern JavaScript stuff, and again, JSX stuff that we've never could do before. So for example, I'm just going to put parentheses around this, but we can do funny things like this. We can actually mix JavaScript with HTML. I could create a link here. And do that. Okay. Now, putting in JavaScript, putting in like this HTML stuff inside JavaScript is a brand new language. It's called JSX. And React developers came up with it. And you definitely could not do that in the browser. You wouldn't know what to do with that, right? At most, it would just output, a less than sign, wouldn't actually create a link in here. But with Webpack and the Babel loader, using the React preset, it knows how to deal with this, and it knows how to translate that into JavaScript. That the browser will understand. And then when the browser executes this, then that's where the React concepts come in, and it'll output this to that mount point. Okay, so I got to recompile it. Again, if you're really interested in Webpack, follow this example and then look up the Webpack dev server. That's something that will, again, automatically recompile and reload your page for you. There's also a React dev to see. Yes. Mark just mentioned that there's also React dev tools. That is great, actually. Yeah. If you're a React developer, you can download these React dev tools, and it just appears as like another tab in your developer tools in your browser. So your browser, these develop tools. And what's really awesome about it, for those of you who do know React, you have state, props, these kind of things. You can look at the React tree, and you can look at like the state and the props of the React components, all that stuff. And then there's the profile to check performance. I've never actually used the profiler. Very interested to see how that is. Okay, so recompiled, and now let's see if that JSX actually works. Okay, so if I reload this, there you go. Now I have a hello link there. Okay, so that's all working as can be. In a nutshell, to get React up and running. If you follow my example at this point, you can now code full out React in here. Okay, and just to recap, the reason we're able to do that is because Babel will translate this for us. How do we get Babel to translate it for us? Well, we load up Babel into Webpack, and Webpack actually executes that translation for us using the Babel loader. Okay. And how are we able to use this import statement? Well, Webpack does that as well. It creates a dependency. Well, how are we able to use Webpack? Well, Webpack is a Node.js tool. Okay. So we installed it using Node.js and NPM, and then we're able to do all that. Well, how are we able to use Node? We installed Node from their website, and then that's it. Okay? All right, so that's it, guys. That is React, getting React set up in a nutshell. Now we are free to actually do React tutorials from this point on. It might not be next week. It'll be at some point. But that's pretty much it for the formal lesson today. So hope you guys learned something. Hope you guys were able to get a bit more understanding of what each of these components is doing. I know I myself now have a great understanding of it. I've used Webpack for a long time, not really understanding what it does. And kind of in preparation for this lecture, I definitely gained a lot more clear understanding of how it works. So yeah, it's really interesting to use this. Now, if you guys are in the Ruby on Rails framework, there is something called Webpacker. And Webpacker is basically Ruby on Rails wrapper around Webpack. So it comes with its own configuration, its own presets, and all this stuff like that. It's kind of like the Rails team set up Webpack for you and put it inside this thing called Webpacker. And this also brings me back to the very first thing I talked about, which is Create React App. There is a tool out there called Create React App, which now that you guys understand this, I highly recommend going and using it. Create React App within one line, one command, basically does what this does. It sets up the Webpack config. It has it all ready to go already. It bundles it deep kind of in the Node module, so you can't actually edit it. But it basically has everything you need to get a React app up and running. So Create React App basically does exactly this. Thanks for the comment, Ricky. Ricky said, he's been using it for a while, and now he actually understands, what they do and how they do it. So that's great. I hope, again, I myself learned a lot in prepping this. So hopefully more people looked at. Thanks, Zach, for the thanks as well, and tuning in. Hopefully you guys really take this start, and this is the thing I'm trying to get at with a lot of these lessons, guys, is that there are frameworks we use. I used Ruby on Rails for a long time, and it wasn't until a lot later that I started understanding some of the concepts of how things work underneath. And I'm still only scratching the surface with a lot of these things. So, I mean, a lot of you guys, there's a lot of things out there you can learn in terms of like how to use things, but it's nice to kind of get a little bit of a deeper understanding of how things work behind the scenes. I know it's not, again, to the level of, you're coding absolutely everything yourself, but it's kind of nice to understand if you want to configure Webpack yourself or configure Babel yourself. Understanding these things a little bit definitely helps. So definitely thanks, guys, for tuning in. Now, again, I'm excited because we're set up for React now. If you guys want to do a React lesson, we can definitely do that. So okay, so the Q&A, as always, again, on the left side is everything that I do in my day-to-day life. So Rails, React, Web, PostgreSQL, React Native, Expo, Heroku, GitHub, Bitbucket, and the Adobe Creative Suite. On the right side are things that I've dabbled in: Java, JSP, ASP.NET, C#.NET, Objective-C, Swift, Node.js. Happy to answer any questions about anything we covered today, anything that you see on the screen. If you guys have suggestions or ideas for future lessons, definitely let me know. Always looking for ideas. A lot of times I struggle for ideas. So definitely happy to that. And then again, even it was a little bit of a shout out to Dinesh, who reached out to me on LinkedIn. He is a former student of mine who actually had some questions about BiteSite. So definitely feel free to ask me about BiteSite and the business as well. Always happy to answer what I can. So I'm going to stick around for a couple minutes if you guys have any questions about this stuff. Hopefully it was kind of clear, and hopefully you guys didn't get too lost. I know it's a lot to cover, and I know there's a lot of things I glossed over. I glossed over the presets in Babel. So if you want to look up that, definitely go check out Babel, and you can look at what Babel presets are. It's definitely something that I always mix up what belongs to Webpack and what belongs to Babel. Like I thought, presets were part of Webpack. No, Webpack is loaders and plugins, and presets are part of Babel. Like these kind of things are something that I always get lost in. So definitely look that up. The one thing that, again, you guys should really be kind of, that you should be, but that I'm blown away by when it comes to Webpack is that everything reduces to JavaScript. Even pictures, even images. Images I'm sure get encoded into like base 64 encoding, where they encode all the bits and the bytes, and it's JavaScript, and then it gets reconstructed in the browser and stuff like that. So and CSS maybe a bit easier to understand, because all it would do is like translate that into inline styles and stuff like that. I'm assuming, or maybe it spits out CSS. I don't know. But it's interesting that Webpack takes all these things and ultimately whittles it down to JavaScript, which is really cool. So Webpack is very, very powerful that way. I'm pretty sure it's only used for the web. I mean, hence why it's called Webpack. It's to use all this fancy JavaScript in the web. I'm curious, if there's something similar like with Node.js. But again, a lot of what Webpack does, you don't need in Node.js, because Node.js does it already. So definitely very cool stuff there. It is mind blowing understanding what it does. It's like when we covered active record in Rails and query builders. It's like amazing to understand how it constructs these queries on the fly, these kind of things. There's something I've been doing some decent amount of reading on recently with called Rails UJS and jQuery UJS. Something that I kind of understood in the past, but the more I read up on it, the more it's very impressive. It's these really impressive pieces of technology that you almost don't realize that they're doing these amazing things, because they just do it so seamlessly. And for people to come up with that, it's amazing. So Mark, great live stream. Cleared up some things. I wasn't really sure about. Thanks. Okay, great to hear. Great to hear. So I'm very happy with the topic today. Again, maybe it's a good indication that if I'm learning something, then it's a good stream too, because I'm really interested in it, and hopefully others would be able to learn from it. So yeah, any other questions, guys? Again, happy to stay on for a couple more minutes to answer some questions, or any suggestions about what you want to learn next. I mean, do you guys want to just jump into React next lecture? React has a lot of interesting concepts. It's a great library and one that I love. Definitely loved ever since I started using it, and has definitely survived the test of time for me. So let me know if there's any suggestions that you guys have. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel again if you're new to it, and ring the bell and spread the word. I started seeing some people on LinkedIn, from around, liking the post and stuff like that. But I'm hoping to get more and more people joining the actual live chat so we can have some interesting discussions and get more suggestions. But I do understand not everybody can make it Thursdays at 8 p.m. And I do understand a lot of people watch it afterwards. So I still really appreciate that. But the more you guys can spread the word, I really appreciate it. So, and again, thanks to the newcomers, Ricky, happy to hear from you, and happy to see you're doing well. I think, Ricky, it was you who reached out, or who had a small chat with my friend Aaron. Me and Aaron are developing Local Eats Ottawa, and I think he had posted something, and you recognize it or whatever. So always nice to have those small world connections. So yeah, again, so thanks to everybody who's been joining all the past weeks, and the regulars, and thanks to any of the newcomers. It's always good to have some new faces on here. So let me know, guys. Anything else? Looks like question. I mean, I know the stream is definitely delayed. And I know we're getting a lot of kind of drop frames on this one. I guess my computer's just not handling things well tonight. So, yeah, definitely. Thanks, guys. So let me know if there's anything else. Otherwise, I'm gonna kind of start to shut down here. All right. Doesn't look like there's any question. Just checking out the actual feed and seeing how long ago it was. Not too bad, actually. I think we're only a couple seconds behind, so not too bad. All right, guys. Zach, Mark, Ricky, thanks for commenting. Really appreciate you guys joining, and thanks to everybody else who happened to watch. We will see you guys next Thursday, 8 p.m. Thanks again. It's been great.